Hey guys, welcome to the Artisan channel. Man, it has been a hectic week and I'm finally able to upload another video and I'm happy to do so. So what we're going to do today is a little bit different than what we do normally. We're going to take a look at a line of products made by ANBERNIC. And ANBERNIC has been known around the retro game handheld community as being very good in their track record, have positive feedback. The developers are supporting their products relentlessly from all around the world, and there have been updates coming out every month, or every week if I'm not exaggerating, and it's very interesting to see what they come up with. And all their products are very good quality and their software really gets supported very well by the developers, and I'm happy to say that there's a success that nobody or no other handheld company has seen over the last 2 years that I've observed ANBERNIC and other companies. Now, I've owned all the products that they have produced over the last 2 years, and we're going to take a little bit of a look at all the handhelds that they have produced and see the differences between them. I'm not paid or sponsored by ANBERNIC, so don't worry about that. I'm going to give my gripes as well without a problem. This review is not really price dependent, but we're going to take a look at all these handhelds in case you have found one of them and want to take a look at the specs and stuff like that and what it's capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing. And we're going to cover that in this video today. So let's get into the video. So the first two devices we're going to talk about on this list is the ANBERNIC RS97 Plus V2 and the ANBERNIC RG300. Both of them have the same specs. They have the same innards, but they look different in terms of layout. So the RG300 has a Game Boy looking layout and the RS97 has a Game Boy Advance looking layout. Even though it has an analog stick, it does not work as an analog stick. It works as a D-pad. So don't think that it will work as an analog stick on PlayStation 1 games. It's just a copy of the D-pad. So both of them are pretty much the same, but the layouts are different. The processor on both of these devices is a dual-core 528 megahertz processor, a JZ4760 dual-core processor. And the display is very crisp, beautiful, with nice viewing angles, colorful IPS display. It is 3 inches, 320 by 240 resolution display. The RAM is 128 MB DDR2 RAM. The storage can be expanded up until 32 GB of internal storage, SD card storage. So you cannot really save a lot of games on this one. I don't know if anybody had more of success with the storage story, but it is written here that it can go up until 32 GB. The speakers are very good quality. They're good quality speakers, and it has a headphone jack, just a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. And it charges over micro USB, not USB Type-C, which is quite old. The battery life is good because it is low powered and has a 1800 milliamperes battery. It will last you a long time, but not forever, of course. It is like 6 to 8 hours of gameplay. This device is not powerful enough to tackle PSX emulation and is not powerful enough to run Yoshi's Island and Star Fox for the Super Nintendo on satisfactory FPS, as well as some arcade games will not work on it, like the CPS3 will not work on this handheld. Now, these two devices run a lower powered version and lower end version of OpenDingux. Most of the devices on this list run OpenDingux, but the newer versions of it, and for higher end processors and chipsets. Now, we're not going to get into that yet because we're talking about unique cases. Like, these two devices are the oldest two devices, and the unique cases for the JZ4760 chipset. Let's talk first about the RG351P, which is the newest iteration of all their devices out there. This is a quad-core processor, 1.3 gigahertz RK3326 chipset device. And it can run up until N64, Dreamcast, PlayStation 1, PlayStation Portable, Nintendo DS games on this device. Nintendo DS and PlayStation Portable don't run that well yet because of some issues with the operating system, but that will change in the future, I hope. And another thing that is iffy about this device is the display. The display is a very good IPS display, but it is 3:2 aspect ratio, unlike most of the devices that it runs on the emulators that it has. It is 4:3, but this device is 3:2 aspect ratio, which is kind of iffy in my opinion. It's good for Game Boy Advance gameplay, but not good for all the other emulators that this device can run. It has a good graphic processor. It is a Mali G31 graphic processor, MP2. And the battery life is quite good, 5 hours to 7 hours of battery life, 3,500 milliampere battery. We have data as a Type-C USB port for Wi-Fi dongles and keyboards and stuff like that. It runs a firmware called Emulation. So that's the operating system of this device. It's called Emulation. It looks like RetroPie. If you know RetroPie, then you'll feel at home with Emulation. And its storage can go up until 256 GB of SD card storage expansion. Of course, it has a 3.5 millimeter headset, and it has 2 speakers, down-firing speakers, stereo speakers on the bottom, which sound very clean and nice. But that's it for the RG351P. Not perfect, but very good in terms of emulation capabilities. It's not there yet, and I hope it will get better in the future. And maybe the next iterations will have 4:3 aspect ratios. Well, keep our fingers crossed on that one. But let's move on to the next family of handhelds from ANBERNIC, which is the RG350 family of handhelds. The devices that go under the RG350 family are the RG350, the RG350P, the RG350M, as well as the RG280M and the RG280V. So there are some metal handhelds out there in this family, and we're going to mention those as well, and we're going to talk about the core differences that are between these devices. But most of them have the same specs when it comes to the processor, the memory, and how you interface with the I/O, and in terms of how they look. But we have some key differences when it comes to the display technology and the batteries that are inside of these devices, as well as the materials that these devices are made of. Some of them are from metal and are very high build quality, and we're going to mention that when we go over those devices. Now let's first talk about the base model RG350 and talk about the specs of this family member. We're not going to mention the specs every time because they're all the same almost. We're just going to go over the specs for the RG350 OG model. The processor is an Ingenic JZ4770 dual core processor running at 1.0 gigahertz. This device is made out of plastic. You can get it for translucent plastic as well. It has a good build quality, not really the best out of the list. I would say the least out of the list out of all of them because it's also the cheapest. And the graphics processor for people who care about that is a Vivante JC860. The display on this device is 3.5 inches and it is an IPS display, 4:3 aspect ratio. It has a resolution of 320 by 240. Now it is an IPS display, so it is very colorful, very crisp, very clear, and has very nice viewing angles. But on the base model only, there is a gap between the glass screen and the LCD panel on there. So the image quality isn't as high quality as the rest of its peers on this list, because if you have a laminated display, which is what they call when a display is absolutely close to the or stuck to the glass panel, that's called a laminated display, and it looks a lot better than a display that has a gap in there. But this is the cheapest model, so there's nothing really to complain about. It is an IPS display nonetheless, and it looks very good. The battery is a 2,500 milliamperes battery. It has a capacity of 6 hours to 12 hours of gameplay, depending on what you're playing, because this device can play up until PlayStation 1, not including Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, PSP, and Nintendo DS and Sega Saturn. Now, what it does play, it plays perfectly fine. but the battery life differs when it comes to what games you're playing. Of course, if it's 3D for PlayStation 1, you will get out of it like 6 hours, and if it's 2D, you can get up to 10 hours, 12 hours of gameplay. It really varies bigly depending on what you're playing. Now, let's talk about why this device is still so popular compared to the RG351P, the newest one. It is because what it does perfectly and in a good way. People don't complain about that. Who like games up until PlayStation 1 will have this device and will be ecstatic with it, because it has a very user-friendly user interface. It runs an operating system called OpenDingux, as we mentioned earlier, and it is quite stable, and they really work hard on it as well. It is a very beautiful operating system. I really like it. And you know, if you don't play games like N64, Dreamcast, and those newer consoles, you want this for pure retro gaming up until PlayStation 1, then this device definitely is very good for you. I don't recommend going for the base model. I recommend going for the next model on the list, which is the RG350P. But first, before we go into the RG350P, it is $10 difference in terms of pricing, but it has a laminated display and it looks a lot better compared to the display on the RG350. And also the analog stick placement has been changed from upper to the bottom, and it's a lot better in my opinion. Its design is a lot better, and it's like a revamped version of the RG350. What we forgot to mention is the memory and storage. So we have a 512 MB DDR2 RAM memory in there, and it has two SD card slots, one for internal memory for the OS and operating system, and one for external memory, and that is for ROMs and stuff like that. It is recommended to go for 16 GB for the dedicated OS memory, and if you want to go all out for the microSD expandable storage in there, you can go up until 256 GB of memory, so you can really load it with a lot of ROMs, and that's very nice. The I/O and interface is a USB Type-C port. You got a USB Type-C port, which we're operating in the right era right now, not micro USB. You have an HDMI port, so you can also plug it into your television or screen and then enjoy some gameplay on there. For the rest, that's it for the RG350. Let's move on to the 350P. I actually already mentioned all the differences, key differences between these two. It has the same specs, but the difference here is the display. It is a 3.5-inch IPS display, and it has the same resolution of 320 by 240, but it is laminated, so it is stuck to the front panel of the glass panel on the screen unit, and that is very beautiful, very good looking, and makes a big difference in my opinion. For the rest, the specs are completely the same because it is a revamped version of the RG350. They changed the analog stick placement on there to the bottom instead of having it on an awkward position on the top. So you had a problem with the D-pad, reaching the D-pad so low and getting cramps in your thumbs when you're playing games using the D-pad. So they changed that design flaw and listened very closely to their fans and changed that, which is very nice. Now let's move on to the RG350M. The RG350M is exactly like the RG350P in terms of design, but it is made out of metal, which makes a big difference. It is very different in terms of how it feels. It's a lot heavier. If you like heavier handhelds, then you feel quite at home with this one, but the build quality is just superb. And yeah, there's nothing to complain about with the build quality because it's made out of brushed aluminum and it's very beautifully made and built. The speakers sound great as well. They have the same speakers on both units, the plastic one and the metal one, but they both sound very great and the build quality is just perfect. The difference here once again comes in the display. It is a 3.5 inch IPS display with the resolution of 640 by 480, which is the double of the previous display that we mentioned. It is of course laminated as well, but a lot more crisp for games and a lot more clear. So there's a big difference in terms of display. And if you have more money and want to go for one of the RG350 family members, then this definitely is the best one out there, because it has the best out of everything. It has the best screen. It has the same battery capacity, 2,500 milliamperes battery. And it is very good. I like it the most out of all the RG350 family members. So let's move on to the lower end metal version, which is also made out of brushed aluminum and very beautiful. It is the RG280 metal version. Now it has the same specs, but it lacks, number one, an HDMI port, as well as the second analog stick is not available on there. So that is a big difference. And also the screen is a very big difference, because the screen is 2.8 inches instead of 3.5 inches, an IPS display, and the resolution is 480 by 320. You might be like, but that is a little bit weird, because the aspect ratio still is 4:3. Actually, the pixels has been reduced to half its size, but it still is 480 by 320, which is the right way to deal with it, unlike the RG351P, which wasn't really that ideal, since its aspect ratio was 3:2 aspect ratio. Now, that's the difference between the RG350M and the RG280M. Let's move on to the RG280V, which is a vertical version of the RG350. It has the same specs as the RG350 family members, and it is very teeny and tiny, very small. It's quite cute, actually, in my opinion. But the differences here is that it doesn't have HDMI port. It has a 2.8 inch IPS display with a 320 by 240 resolution, which is quite nice. It has a 2,000 milliampere battery instead of a 2,500 milliamperes battery, but it still is sufficient for such a small device, because the screen is a lot smaller. So that means less brightness. I mean less pixels to deal with. Not less pixels to deal with, less screen size to deal with, to sap all that battery life. So it is not really gonna deplete that fast. It probably will be at the same 6 to 12 hours mark. For the rest, what we have on here is everything you have on an RG350, except for the analog sticks. It does not have the analog sticks on there, but a lot of the games that are, even the PS1 games, I cannot remember any PS1 games that really rely on analog sticks, to be honest, because I don't really have that much experience, but there are a few PS1 games out there that rely on analog sticks and really need you to have them to be able to play them. But without analog stick, it's still able to play PS1 games very well and fine. And that is that for the RG350 family. Whatever you found on the internet and whichever was the right price for you, and you are thinking of buying, I hope you'll be satisfied with it. And this has been the buyer guide for the ANBERNIC family handhelds, and I hope this has been helpful to you guys. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.